Hello, welcome to Key Philosophies. Today we will be reading from Manly P. Hall's book, The Secret Teaching of All Ages, specifically on philosophy. Philosophy is the science of estimating values. The superiority of any state or substance over another is determined by philosophy, by assigning a position of primary importance of what remains when all that is secondary has been removed. Philosophy thus becomes the true index of priority or emphasis in the realm of speculative thought. The mission of philosophy, a priori, is to establish the relation of manifested things to their invisible and ultimate cause or nature. Philosophy, writes William Hamilton, has been defined as the science of things divine and human, and of the causes in which they are contained, Cicero. The science of effects by their causes, and that's Hobbes. The science of sufficient reasons, and that's Leibniz. The science of things possible, inasmuch as they are possible. Science of things possible, inasmuch as they are possible. That is Wolff. The science of things evidently deduced from first principles, and that's Descartes, or Descartes. The science of truths, sensible and abstract. The application of reason to its legitimate objects. The science of relations of all knowledge to the necessary ends of human reason, and that's Kant. The science of the original form of the ego, or mental self, that's Krug. The science of sciences, that's Fichte. The science of the absolute, von Schilling. The science of the absolute indifference of the ideal and real, von Schilling. Or the identity of identity and non-identity, that's Hegel. See lectures on metaphysics and logic, it says. The 6 headings under which the disciplines of philosophy are commonly classified are metaphysics, which deals with such abstract subjects as cosmology, theology, and the nature of being. Logic, which deals with the laws governing rational thinking, or as it has been called, the doctrine of fallacies. Ethics, which is the science of morality, individual responsibility, and character, concerned chiefly with an effort to determine the nature of good. The psychology, which is devoted to investigation and classification of those forms of phenomena referable to a mental origin. Epistemology, which is the science concerned primarily with the nature of knowledge itself and the question of whether it may exist in an absolute form. And aesthetics, which is the science of the nature of and the reactions awakened by the beautiful, the harmonious, the elegant, and the noble. Plato regarded philosophy as the greatest good ever imparted by divinity to man. In the 20th century, however, it has become a ponderous and complicated structure of arbitrary and irreconcilable notions, yet each substantiated by almost incontestable logic. The lofty theorems of the old Academy, which Iamblichus likened to the nectar and ambrosia of the gods, have been so adulterated by opinion, which Heraclitus declared to be a falling sickness of the mind, that the heavenly mead would now be quite unrecognizable to this great Neoplatonist. Convincing evidence of the increasing superficiality of modern scientific and philosophic thought is its persistent drift toward materialism. When the great astronomer Laplace was asked by Napoleon why he had not mentioned God in his Traité de la Mécanique Céleste, the mathematician naively replied, "Sire, I had no need for that hypothesis." In his treatise on atheism, Sir Francis Bacon tersely summarized the situation thus: "A little philosophy inclineth man's mind to atheism, but depth in philosophy brings men's minds about to religion." The metaphysics of Aristotle open with these words: "All men naturally desire to know. To satisfy this common urge, the unfolding human intellect has explored the extremities of imaginable space without, and the extremities of imaginable self within, seeking to estimate the relationship between the one and the all, the effect and the cause, nature and the groundwork of nature, the mind and the source of the mind, the spirit and the substance of the spirit, the illusion and the reality." An ancient philosopher once said, "He who has not even a knowledge of common things is a brute among men. He who has an accurate knowledge of human concerns alone is a man among brutes. But he who knows all that can be known by intellectual energy is a god among men." Man's status in the natural world is determined, therefore, by the quality of his thinking. He whose mind is enslaved to his bestial instincts is philosophically not superior to the brute. He whose rational faculties ponder human affairs is a man, and he whose intellect is elevated to the consideration of divine realities is already a demigod, for his being partakes of the luminosity with which his reason has brought him into proximity. In his encomium of the science of sciences, Cicero is led to exclaim, "O philosophy, life's guide, O searcher out of virtue and expeller of vices, what could we and every age of men have been without thee? Thou hast produced cities, thou hast called men scattered about into the social enjoyment of life." In this age, the word philosophy has little meaning unless accompanied by some other qualifying term. The body of philosophy has been broken up into numerous isms, more or less antagonistic, which have become so concerned with the effort to disprove each other all of their fallacies that the sublimer issues of divine order and human destiny have suffered deplorable neglect. The ideal function of philosophy is to serve as the stabilizing influence in human thought. By virtue of its intrinsic nature, it should prevent man from ever establishing unreasonable codes of life. Philosophers themselves, however, have frustrated the ends of philosophy by exceeding in their wool gathering those untrained minds whom they are supposed to lead in the straight and narrow path of rational thinking. To list and declassify any but the more important of the now recognized schools of philosophy is beyond the space limitations here. The vast area of speculation covered by philosophy will be appreciated best after a brief consideration of a few of the outstanding systems of philosophic discipline which have swayed the world throughout and during the past 26 centuries. The Greek school of philosophy had its inception with the 7 immortalized thinkers, upon whom was conferred the appellation of Sophos, the wise. According to Diogenes Laertius, there were Thales, Solon, Chilon, many, Cleobius, and Periander. Water was conceived by Thales to be the primal principle or element upon which the earth floated like a ship. The earth and earthquakes were the result of disturbances in this universal sea. And since Thales was an Ionian, the school perpetuating his tenets became known as Ionic. He died in 546 BC and was succeeded by Anaximander, who in turn was followed by Anaximenes, Anaxagoras, and Archelaus, with whom the Ionic schools ended. Anaximander, differing from his master Thales, declared measureless and infinable infinity to be the principle from which all things were generated. Anaximenes asserted air to be the first element of the universe, that souls and even deity itself were composed of it. Interesting idea. Anaxagoras, whose doctrine savors of atomism, held God to be an infinite, self-moving mind, that this divine infinite mind, not enclosed in any body, is the efficient cause of all things, out of the infinite matter consisting of similar parts. Everything being made according to its species by the divine mind, who when all things were at first confusedly mingled together, came and reduced them to order. Archelaus declared the principle of all things to be twofold: mind, which was incorporeal, and air, which was corporeal. The rarefaction, the the rarefaction, I think that's his, or no, rarefaction, that's the word, and condensation of the latter, resulting in fire and water repetitively. The stars were conceived by Archelaus to be burning iron plates. Heraclitus, who lived in 536 to 470 BC and is sometimes included in the Ionic schools, in his doctrine of change and eternal flux, asserted fire to be the first element and also the state into which the world would ultimately be reabsorbed. The soul of the world he regarded as an exhalation from its humid parts, and declared the ebb and flow of the sea to be caused by the sun. After Pythagoras and Samos, its founder, the Italic or Pythagorean school numbers among its most distinguished representatives Empedocles, Epicurus, Archytas. I'm butchering this, but we have Pythagoras in here, among many others. And that would be around 580 to 500 BC, roughly. Conceived mathematics to be the most sacred and exact of all sciences, and demanded of all who came to him for study of familiarity with arithmetic, music, astronomy, and geometry. He laid special emphasis on the philosophic life as a prerequisite to wisdom. Pythagoras was one of the first teachers to establish a community wherein all the members were of mutual assistance to one another in the common attainment of higher sciences. He also introduced the discipline of retrospection as essential to the development of spiritual mind. Pythagoreanism may be summarized as a system of metaphysical speculation concerning the relationship between numbers and the causal agencies of existence. This school also first expounded the theory of celestial harmonics, or the music of the spheres. John Rochlin said of Pythagoras that he taught nothing to his disciples before the discipline of silence. Silence being the first rudiment of contemplation. You'll see that in a lot of orders. In his Sophist, Aristotle credits Empedocles with the discovery of rhetoric. Both Pythagoras and Empedocles accepted the theory of transmigration, the latter saying, "A boy I was, then I did, a maid become a plant, bird, fish, and in the vast sea swum." Archytas is credited with invention of the screw and the crane. Pleasure he declared to be a pestilence because it was opposed to the temperance of the mind. He considered a man without deceit to be as rare as a fish without bones. The Eleatic sect was founded by Xenophanes in 570 to 480 BC, who was conspicuous for his attacks upon the cosmological and theogonic fables of Homer and Hesiod. Xenophanes declared that God was one and incorporeal, in substance and figure round, in no way was resembling man, that he was all sight and all hearing, but breathes not, that he is all things, and mind and wisdom, not generate, but eternal, impassible, immutable, and rational. Xenophanes believed that all things were eternal, that the world was without beginning or end, and that everything which was generated was subject to corruption. He lived to the great age. He lived to great age, and is said to have buried his sons with his own hands. Parmenides studied under Xenophanes, but never entirely subscribed to his doctrines. Parmenides declared the senses to be uncertain and reason the only criterion of truth. He first asserted the earth to be round and also divided its surface into zones of heat and cold. Melissus, who is included in the Eleatic schools, held many opinions in common with Parmenides. He declared the universe to be immovable because, occupying all space, there was no place to which it could be moved. He further rejected the theory of a vacuum in space. Zeno of Elea also maintained that a vacuum could not exist, rejecting the theory of motion. He asserted that there was but one God, who was an eternal, ungenerated being, like Xenophanes. He conceived deity to be spherical in shape. Leucippus held the universe to consist of two parts, one full and the other a vacuum. From the infinite, a host of minute fragmentary bodies descended into the vacuum, where, through continual agitation, they organized themselves into spheres of substance. The great Democritus, to a certain degree, enlarged upon the atomic theory of Leucippus. Democritus declared the principles of all things to be twofold, atoms and vacuum. Both, he asserted, are infinite, atoms in number, vacuum in magnitude. Thus, all bodies must be composed of atoms or vacuum. Atoms possessed two properties, form and size, both characterized by infinite variety, rather. The soul Democritus also conceived to be atomic in structure and subject to dissolution with the body. The mind he believed to be composed of spiritual atoms. Aristotle intimates that Democritus obtained his atomic theory from the Pythagorean doctrine of the monad. Among the Eleatics are also included Protagoras and Anaxarchus. Now, Socrates, in 469 to 399 BC, the founder of the Socratic sect, being fundamentally a skeptic, did not force his opinions upon others, but through the medium of questioning caused each man to give expression to his own philosophy. According to Plutarch, Socrates conceived every place as appropriate for teaching in the whole world was a school of virtue. So he saw the world as a school of virtue. He held that the soul existed before the body and prior to immersion therein, was endowed with all knowledge, that when the soul entered into the material form, it became stupefied, but that by discourses upon sensible objects it was caused to reawaken and to recover its original knowledge. On these premises was based his attempt to stimulate the soul power through irony and inductive reasoning. It has been said of Socrates that the sole subject of his philosophy was man. He himself said of Socrates that the sole subject of the philosophy of man, as I repeat myself, he himself declared philosophy to be the way of true happiness, and its purpose was twofold. One was to contemplate God, or imagine the divine, and two, to abstract the soul from corporeal sense. The principles of all things he conceived to be three in number: God, matter, and ideas. Of God he said, "What he is I know not, what he is not I know." Matter he defined as the subject of generation and corruption. Idea as an incorruptible substance, the intellect of God. Wisdom he considered the sum of the virtues. Among the prominent members of the Socratic sect were Xenophon, oh, can't say that one, Crito, Simon, Glauco, Simmias, Cebes, Professor Zeller, and the authority on ancient philosophies has recently declared that the writings of Xenophon related to Socrates to be forgeries. When the clouds of Aristophanes, a comedy written to ridicule theories of Socrates, was first presented, the great skeptic himself attended the play. During the performance, which caricatured him seated in a basket high in the air, studying the sun, Socrates rose calmly in his seat, to better enable the Athenian spectators to compare his own unprepossessing features with the grotesque mask worn by the actor impersonating him. The Elean sect was founded by the Phaedo of Elis, a youth of noble family, who was brought from slavery at the instigation of Socrates and who became his devoted disciple. Plato so highly admired Phaedo's mentality that he named one of the most famous of his discourses the Phaedo. Phaedo was succeeded in his school by Philistines, who is in turn was followed by Metademus of the doctrines of the Elean sect is little known. Metademus is presumed to have been inclined toward the teaching of Stilpo and the Megarian sect. When Menedemus' opinions were demanded, he answered that he was free, thus intimating that most men were enslaved to their opinions. Menedemus was apparently of a somewhat belligerent temperament, and often returned from his lectures in a badly bruised condition. The most famous of his propositions is stated thus: that which is not the same is different from that which is not the same. This point being admitted, Menedemus continued, to benefit is not the same as good, therefore good does not benefit. After the time of Menedemus, the Elean sect became known as the Eretrian. Its exponents denounced all negative propositions. and all complex and abstruse theories, declaring that only affirmative and simple doctrines could be true. The Megarian sect was founded by Euclid of Megara, not not the same mathematician Euclid, a a great admirer of Socrates. The Athenians passed a law decreeing death to any citizen of Megara found in the city of Athens. Nothing daunted, Euclid donned woman's clothing and went at night to study with Socrates. After the cruel death of their teacher, the discipline or the disciples of Socrates, fearing a similar fate, fled to Megara, where they were entertained with great honor by Euclid. The Megarian school accepted the Socratic doctrine that virtue is wisdom, adding to it the Eleatic concept that goodness is absolute unity and all change an illusion of the senses. Euclid maintained that good has no opposite, and therefore evil does not exist. Being asked about the nature of the gods, he declared himself ignorant of their disposition, save that they hated curious persons. The Megarians were occasionally included among the dialectic philosophers. Euclid, who died in around 374 BC, as it says here, was succeeded in his school by Eubulides, among whose disciples were Alexianus and Apollonius Cronus, Euphantus, who lived to great age and wrote many tragedies, was among the foremost followers of Eubulides. So Diodorus was usually included in the Megarian school, having heard Eubulides' lecture. According to legend, Diodorus died of grief because he could not answer instantly certain questions asked him by Stilpo, at one time master of the Megarian school. Diodorus held that nothing can be moved, since to be moved it must be taken out of the place for which it is and put into a place where it is not, which is impossible because all things must be in the place that they are. Reasonable, right? The Cynics were a sect founded by Antisthenes of Athens around 444 to 365 BC, a disciple of Socrates. Their doctrine may be described as an extreme individualism, which considers man as existing for himself alone and advocates surrounding him by inharmony, suffering, and direst need, that he may thereby be driven to retire more completely into his own nature. The Cynics renounced all worldly possessions, living in the rudest shelters and subsisting upon the coarsest and simplest food, on the assumption that the gods wanted nothing. The Cynics affirmed that those whose needs were fewest consequently approached closest to the divinities. Being asked what he gained by a life of philosophy, Antisthenes replied that he had learned how to converse with himself. So he had learned to converse with himself. Diogenes of Sinope is remembered chiefly for the tub in the Metrome, which for many years served him as a home, or tube. The people of Athens loved the beggar philosopher, and when a youth in jest bore holes in the tube, the city presented Diogenes with a new one and punished the youth. Diogenes believed that nothing in life can be rightly accomplished without excitation or exercitation. He maintained that everything in the world belongs to the wise, and declared, or a declaration, which he proved by the following logics. All things belong to the gods. The gods are friends to wise persons. All things are common among friends. Therefore, all things belong to the wise. Among the Cynics are Monimus, Onesicritus, Crates, Metrocle. I don't know. There are many. The Sinaitic sect founded by Aristippus, Aristippus of Cyrene promulgated the doctrine of hedonism. Learning of the fame of Socrates, Aristippus journeyed to Athens and applied himself to the teaching of the great skeptic, Socrates. Pained by the voluptuous and mercenary tenacities of Aristippus, vainly labored to reform the young man. Aristippus has the distinction of being consistent in principle and practice, for he lived in perfect harmony with his philosophy that the quest of pleasure was the chief purpose of life. The doctrines of the Cyrenaics may be summarized as thus. All that is actually known concerning any object or condition is the feeling which it awakens in man's nature. In the sphere of ethics, that which awakens the most pleasant feeling is consequently to be esteemed as the greatest good. Emotion of reactions are classified as pleasant or gentle, harsh and mean. The end of pleasant emotion is pleasure. The end of harsh emotion is grief. And the end of mean emotion, nothing. Through mental perversity, some men do not desire pleasure. In reality, however, pleasure, especially of physical nature, is the true end of existence, and exceeds in every way mental and spiritual enjoyments. Pleasure, furthermore, is limited wholly to the moment. Now is the only time. The past cannot be regarded without regret, and the future cannot be faced without misgiving. Therefore, neither is conducive to pleasure. No man should grieve, for grief is the most serious of all diseases. Nature permits man to do anything as he desires. He is limited only by his own laws and customs. A philosopher is one free from envy, love, and superstition, and whose days are one long round of pleasure. Indulgence was thus elevated by Aristippus to the chief position among the virtues. He further declared philosophers to differ markedly from other men in that they alone would not change the order of their lives if all the laws of men were abolished. Among prominent philosophers influenced by the Cyrenaic doctrines were Hegesias, Anaxagoras, Theodorus, and Bion. The sect of the academic philosophers instituted by Plato in 427 to 347 was divided into three major parts: the Old, the Middle, and the New Academy. And I think we will continue there next time. Well, thanks for dipping into the secret teaching of all ages. As we will have more of this and more perspective later iterations of this program, Key Philosophies. Please give us a like. Please leave a comment if you have any information to add or questions or little rabbit holes to go search down. Thanks for joining me. Good night.